Welcome to another edition of Marriage for Better, for Worse. Hi, I'm Pastor Bob Moeller, and I will be your host for the next 30 minutes as we look at relationship issues from the perspective of God's Word. This program believes that listening, caring, prayer, and God's Word can resolve our relationship issues. Our program title for this edition is Rookie Mistakes in Marriage. Rookie mistakes, the mistakes we make early on that we should have seen coming or should have known better, but maybe we didn't. However, you can always learn from those who've come before you. We'll get to that in just a moment. I want to stress the fact that I'm not a professional counselor, licensed marriage therapist, psychologist. I am indeed a pastor who believes that God's Word has timeless wisdom and power to impact our lives. I believe the gospel of Jesus Christ is ultimately the answer to every problem that our soul and heart may have. Well, let's get to the topic, rookie mistakes in marriage, and what I mean by that. It's not uncommon for couples that have been married for several decades to look back and recognize the mistakes they made early on in their marriage. And they would like to warn others they don't have to make the same mistakes. Now, from the vantage point of 20 or 30 years of marriage, they realize that they committed a number of what I'm calling rookie mistakes. Rookie mistakes are those actions, attitudes, decisions that bring unnecessary, unneeded interpersonal conflict, relationship tensions, and painful consequences to a marriage. It is what they call in baseball an unforced error. In the spirit of helping those of you who are about to get married or are newly married, I would like to offer some advice to help spare you making the common rookie mistakes that can do a lot of harm to your marriage. Rookie mistake number one, try to change your spouse. Rookie mistake number one. Try to change your spouse. Let me save you years of frustration, arguing, and desperation by telling you the plain and unvarnished truth. You will never change your spouse. You will never change your spouse. Only God can. Okay? You can keep hammering, you can keep criticizing, you can keep nagging, you can keep yelling. I hope you're not doing any of those, but if you are, I want to tell you it will never work to bring about change in your spouse. You were never called to change your spouse. That is not why you got married. You were called to unconditionally love or respect your spouse and serve the Lord your God. That's why you were called together, to bring honor and glory. He never gave you the title of change agent. So can I say it plainly? Give it up. Give it up today trying to change your spouse. I know they may need to change. Listen, I'm totally sympathetic. I totally get it. But you will not be the person that changes them. Rookie mistake number two, criticize your spouse's family. Criticize them early and often in your marriage. Sure, you will have some hard adjustments adapting to a whole new set of relatives you inherited when you met your spouse. But criticizing them over and over and over to your spouse is a lose-lose proposition. You lose, your spouse loses, the marriage loses. Why? Blood is thicker than water, and by criticizing your spouse's family, your partner believes you are criticizing them. When you go after their family and point out all its problems and faults and whatever, it's the same as going after your spouse. Even if they agree with you, it's still wounding their heart. So give it up. If they want to criticize their own family, let them do it, but don't you pile on. Rookie mistake number three, fight in front of your kids or others. Fight or argue loudly sometimes, tenaciously, meanly in front of your kids or others. While you both may feel you have a right to say what you're thinking and you need to vent your emotions right now, even if you are running hot, and you do so in the presence of your children, well, I have some news for you. You are damaging your children in ways they may struggle with for the rest of their lives. That's right. If you argue and fight, yell, curse, call names, slam doors, silent treatments, I don't care what it is. If your poor little children are watching and observing them, you will certainly damage their hearts, and in some cases, that damage may last for a lifetime. I'm not making this up. I sit on a regular basis with couples struggling in their marriage that tell me all they knew at home was fighting, and it broke their heart. So, if you are damaging them, stop the fighting right now, and I mean stop it right now. And if you need to address issues between you, do so behind closed doors. And apologize to your children if you slip up and argue in their presence. They're very forgiving, by the way. They're more than ready to excuse or let go of what you did, put it behind them, but you need to be sincere and apologize. I don't care how little they are, they didn't need to see that ugliness. Rookie mistake number 4. Bring your family or friends into your arguments. Go tell your family or go tell your friends about all your arguments. Yes, it may feel good to call mom or dad when you're in a big fight with your spouse. And yes, it feels good to tell them just how bad your spouse is, what a loser him or her may be. And yes, it feels good to receive their undying sympathy and support, which you almost certainly will because, again, blood is thicker than water. You're their child and they're going to take your side. The problem is this. Once the two of you make up, and you usually do, your parents or friends will still be mad at your spouse. Yeah, you two are just fine. You're back on a honeymoon. Things are going swimmingly. The ugly fight is in the past, and your parents are now still thinking, why in the world did she marry him or did he marry her? Because you came and you filled them up with all sorts of nasty information. Do you see the mistake in that? The solution is never, under almost any circumstance, and here I will give an exception clause. The circumstances where you might want to tell your parents or friends is if actual abuse is occurring or actual infidelity or something akin to that. I'm talking a big box, major, all capital letters type of problem. Yes, there are times we need to reach out to family and friends and tell them the sad truth that is going on, that may be destroying you and may be destroying your children and the family. There is a time to do that, but not when you get in a fight over what kind of car to buy or where you should spend a vacation, or whether or not you should join a softball league or go golfing, or whether you talk too much on the phone to your friends. No, those are not issues that you take to other people. You can take them to a pastor, to a counselor, to someone you trust, but generally speaking, don't do it to your family. If you need outside help, go find it. But don't go running home to mama and daddy just because you had a big fight with your spouse and your feelings are hurt. Rookie mistake number 5, and this may be the most significant, the one that will have the longest lasting negative consequences: give up on your marriage too soon. It's a rookie mistake to give up on your marriage too soon. The majority of divorces, statistically speaking, take place in the first 5 to 7 years of marriage. And that's important because in the first 5 to 7 years of marriage, most couples have not yet gained the needed wisdom or skills to communicate well and solve conflicts in productive ways. You are still learning. You are still figuring that out. So to choose to end the marriage before it even gets started is foolishness. It's wrong. Apart, again, from major big ticket issues that can justifiably end a marriage, adultery, infidelity, serious issues, you need to stay committed to your wedding vows and ride out the storm. You know, the proverb says that when the storm is past, the righteous will remain standing. And storms come into a marriage. Just the way life is, Satan will certainly send his storms that he can get away with, and it will test your marriage. And it may test you to the brink where you feel so much like giving up. But you know, they did a study of couples that felt like giving up years ago, and they followed them over 5 years. And those that 5 years later were still married reported a significantly higher level of satisfaction, and were so glad they stayed in the relationship. Those who divorced and left almost unanimously expressed sorrow that they did, regret, that they should have stayed with their first marriage. Again, I'm talking apart from those issues like physical abuse or a serious pornography problem. There are some things that you can and should not live with. But that's not the number one reason why most couples divorce in those early years. They just can't get along. They just can't solve their fights, and so they call it quits. Most young couples that have considered ending their marriage are tremendously grateful they did not do so, even in just a matter of a few years. And as we say in our ministry, the only way out is through. If you want to get, you got problems, ask God for the way through, not the way out. Let me encourage you with Jeremiah chapter 29. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. If you're in those early years, having those early rookie problems, follow Jeremiah 29 by faith. And over time, you will see God vindicate your confidence in Him and His Word. Okay, let's look at some issues, questions. I married my husband knowing he was more of a quiet and reserved man. I found his calm and relaxed approach to life appealing, since I tend to be the more nervous and anxious type. But now, 2 years into our marriage, his lack of communication and quietness is driving me crazy. I keep reading books on how to build a better marriage, but nothing seems to work. Sometimes I get mad at him and deliberately try to provoke him just to get him to talk to me. At supper, I try to get him to tell me about his day, but he just shrugs his shoulders and says, it was fine. I'm sorry I married him if this is the way it's going to be for the next 40 years. Well, two things I would say in response to that. First of all, the reason you married him in his calm and quiet manner, you need to remember that. You need to go back and say, there was something that he brought of value into my life. He was a shadow side of my personality that I needed to develop. That's as true today as it was when you first met him. It's just that now what once attracted him, or you to him, and now repels you. Number two, I'm going to guess that he's quiet because nobody listens to him. Now, I may be wrong, but from my experience, quiet men or women are usually quiet, not just because by nature they're that way, but because growing up, no one actually listened to them, so they learned not to say anything. And they were pressured by their parents in many cases, and that shut them down. Are you doing the same thing? Are you pressuring your husband? He is going to shut down. What if you just asked him a few questions, not loaded ones, but just simple ones, and listened? Didn't interrupt, argue, debate, tell him exactly what you thought. What if you just listened to him and remained quiet when he was done talking until he started talking again, and still basically remain engaged but quiet? Let him talk some more. I'm going to guess that eventually he's going to open up and tell you all sorts of things. Well, you don't know my husband, Pastor Bob. Well, maybe I don't. But I know men like him, and I know in my office when I listen to men, and they really understand I'm going to listen to them, not argue, debate, put them down, shame, guilt, whatever. They talk 2 to 3 hours without stopping. That's quiet men. There's hope for your marriage, but you may need to just approach it in a different way. Ever since our honeymoon, I've realized I have a far greater interest in sexual intimacy than my wife does. This has led to numerous arguments and fights in our marriage. I've come to the point where I feel she must be frigid and that I'll never get to experience true satisfaction in this marriage. Do I have a right to end the marriage since it seems she misled me into believing that she wanted a fulfilling sexual relationship as well? I feel cheated, frustrated, and angry. Well, I don't know that you were misled. She may not have understood herself that well prior to going to marriage. I don't think maybe she was misleading you. But based again on experiences that I've had with couples, there could be several explanations why your wife is that way. Number one, and this is very sadly common, she may have been abused as a child or a teenager, and sex to her is violation. Sex to her is degradation, devaluing. It's a horrible experience. Now, that's not your fault, and you don't want to act that way, but she brings that pain to this relationship. Well, rather than getting angry at her, you need to seek help for the healing of her heart from the sexual abuse. And you need to bring this to the Lord in prayer as one who is supporting her rather than angry or attacking her. There can be other reasons why she is sexually withdrawn. She may feel that you don't have an emotional connection to her. You don't respond to her emotional needs. Women are not, by and large, going to be interested in a sexual relationship where there is no emotional intimacy that is a precursor to it. For them, they feel, because sex is such a totality in terms of an experience, they are giving all of them to their husband, that if there are conflicts and unresolved issues, they're going to feel inauthentic. In fact, they're going to feel cheap in some cases to be involved without these issues resolved. Now, men think, well, let's use sex to resolve our issues. Well, okay, but that's not the way your wife thinks. And so you're going to need help to sort that out. But it doesn't mean she could not become more sexually responsive to you and the two of you could not develop a truly satisfying relationship. My brother-in-law is a real jerk. He yells at his wife and children in front of us. He's sarcastic, insulting, and we understand he struggles with pornography. Every time we are with him, I can't wait to go home. Yet for some strange reason, my wife is hurt whenever I point these things out. She knows what I'm saying is true, but she's offended when I say something. Why can't she just admit that her brother, in this case, is an obnoxious person and allow us to avoid him whenever possible? Well, again, as I said earlier in the program, she may understand, she may even agree with you. She may see it all, but it still hurts for you to say it. It still hurts for you to go after him. Why? Well, he is her flesh and blood. That is her family. And to be mean about her brother is to be mean about her. Now you go, well, that's not what I'm trying to do. I know it isn't, but that's how it comes across. So you know what? There may be things that bother you about him. Well, you can share that with her in a way that is open to healing and reconciliation, but do not attack him to her. Do not attack her family. It will only break her heart and drive you further from him, from you. My mother-in-law constantly puts me down, criticizes me whenever we are at family get-togethers. One reason is my husband comes from a much wealthier family than I did, and I get the strong impression that they feel he married down. Even though my husband sees how I am treated, he insists we spend time with his family on weekends, holidays, and other times of the year. I've told him I can't take it anymore, but he tells me his mother means well. I often cry myself to sleep after a bad encounter with her, but he doesn't seem to have the courage to stand up to her. Well, this is an issue where your husband needs to man up. And he needs to realize that you are his first priority. A man shall leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, become one flesh. That is what Genesis 2 teaches us. And if he's choosing his mother over you, and maybe in some cases the father or whatever, that's wrong. Because when we get married, we transfer our primary loyalty from our family of origin to our new spouse and to our children. So he is violating a basic rule of marriage, and I can see why that hurts you, and I really urge you to go get help. Don't continue to suffer like this. Month after month, year after year, you only become an embittered person. And it may even be necessary for you to refuse to go to family gatherings with him until he seeks help with you to resolve the issue. It's called drawing a boundary. Nothing in marriage requires us that we should be emotionally, verbally, or otherwise abused by our relatives. That nothing in the fine print of marriage says, oh sure, just take it. No, it's wrong too, and it's going to drive a spike between you and your husband. Not a good idea. My wife and I got into an argument in front of some older friends of ours when we went out to dinner one night with them. Somewhat jokingly, the older husband looked across the table and said to my wife, "Why do you let him talk to you that way in public?" The husband later took me aside and said, "Haven't you learned yet? You never speak harshly to your wife in front of others. That was not only rude to her, but it was rude to us as well." I was embarrassed by the incident, but was his advice correct? Yes. He was giving you loving advice. It's just plain basic etiquette that you don't argue with your spouse in front of other people. They do not need to bear that awkwardness. They don't need to be part of the tension that's created. They went out with you to have a good time and to relax, and you arguing with your wife sort of broke the rules of that engagement. I say this lovingly, but grow up. You don't need to argue in public, and you should not shame your spouse, whether it be husband or wife, in front of others. That's a rookie mistake, and you need to stop it while you're still young. My spouse came from a home where his parents fought openly in front of he and his sister. Now that we've been married for 3 years, I see the same pattern developing in our marriage. Just the other day, we were having an argument, and our 2-year-old daughter burst into tears because she said she was scared. How can we break this pattern before we do lasting damage to our children? Well, stop it. And it's really that simple. Stop it. Quit doing it. Both of you, I have a feeling, if the phone rang in the middle of one of your heated arguments, would not go over to the phone and pick it up with that same intensity and rage or whatever. What is it? Who is it? Hello. Oh, hello, you would say. And suddenly you would become polite and well-mannered and calm to whoever was calling. Well, you know what? If you could do it to a stranger, you can do it to your spouse. You can change gears. You can begin to speak in a calm, caring voice. You can apologize for your excesses. And listen, there's a truth that we need to learn early on in our marriage, and it can save you years of sorrow. And it's this: nothing that needs to be said cannot be said with kindness. There is nothing that you need to say that truly needs to be said that cannot be said in a kind manner. Just because it's a hard truth doesn't mean you need to have a hard voice, a hard expression, all of that. You can say whatever needs to be said in a gentle voice, which Proverbs tells us turns away wrath. We've been only married 6 months, but whenever we have a big argument, my wife calls her mother to tell her about it and ask for advice. On some occasions, her mother has actually called me and reprimanded me. Or I get text messages from her sister telling me I need to change my attitude. I resent her bringing her family into our marriage every time we have a disagreement. How can I get her to stop doing that? Well, it is important that she does stop. I talked about in today and other programs that when we tell our parents about our fights, we forget about them, but they don't. We may graciously receive them back, but they may struggle doing that. And the more times you bring junk to them, the harder it's going to get for them. So you need to really point that out. And your wife needs to understand that if she needs to talk to someone, there can be safe people for her to do that. A godly older woman perhaps in the church, or a counselor, or someone where she can talk about her frustrations, but they will not boomerang back to hurt your marriage later on. Is there ever a right time and place to go to your parents for help with your marriage problems? My dad is a wise man and I value his counsel. Is it wrong for me to seek his advice when things are getting tough? Well, this is a little bit different than what I'm talking about. If your father is the type of man who is wise enough to understand that one, parents should not meddle in their children's marriage, that number two, it is up to a couple to solve their own problems rather than having in-laws or someone else. But if he is basically on the side of your marriage rather than on the side of you, do you see the distinction? He's on the side of your marriage rather than your side, then there can be times to talk to our parents. If they are wise, if they will not let it change their attitudes, if they do have something to say. I've read that the majority of marriages divorce in the first 7 years. If you make it beyond that point, you'll stay together. Why is that? Well, I think you learn a number of things if you stay together. One is that anger is usually a passing emotion. Number two, the disillusionment we feel often is temporary. We begin to see the other person in a more positive light. Three, we learn not to trigger each other, not to say things that we know will bring a serious or angry response. We learn to pray and tell Jesus about it instead of trying to change our spouse. Just basically we mature. And we learn that life is not perfect, marriage is not perfect, but it is worth staying together for the kids and for our testimony and our own fulfillment. To review then, to recap, the 5 rookie mistakes of marriage. Rookie mistake number 1, trying to change your spouse. Number 2, criticizing your spouse's family. 3, fighting in front of your kids or others. 4, bringing your family or friends into your arguments. And number 5, giving up on your marriage too soon. Well, thank you so much for joining our program. We urge you to go to YouTube to Marriage TV, all one word, Marriage TV, if you'd like to see this episode or earlier episodes of Marriage for Better, for Worse. Well, we hope we see you next week. Until then, remember, marriage is for better, for worse, and for keeps.